سخنرانیهای سارا چندلر و جاسلین اسکات در کنفرانس پارلمانی در لندن، دادخواهی شهیدان قتل عام ۶۷ قسمت پنجم.
Crimes committed by its own officials. Following extensive research and legal analysis, Amnesty denounced the killings as extrajudicial executions, a significant term from a criminal justice perspective. The committees, or the death commissions, bore no resemblance to a court. They did not operate within existing legislation. They were not concerned with establishing the guilt or innocence of defendants regarding an internationally recognized criminal offense. Prisoners were not informed that they were condemned to death until shortly before their executions. They were not told why they were faced with questions or that their answers could condemn them to death. There was no possibility of appeal at any point during the process. Amnesty International therefore categorized that the mass executions were both summary and extrajudicial in nature, that the mass executions constituted crimes under international law in themselves, regardless of whether they form part of a widespread or systematic attack on the civilian population, and therefore constituted crimes against humanity. Authoritative sources on international law have consistently used the term extrajudicial execution when making the argument that arbitrary deprivation of life can amount to crimes under international law. And the characterization of the 1988 massacres as extrajudicial executions does not shift criminal responsibility away from members of the judiciary involved in the death commissions. On the contrary, their involvement in these commissions places them under suspicion of criminal responsibility for crimes under international law. Given that there is no prospect for justice for victims of these crimes in Iran, the United Nations must set up an independent investigation into the extrajudicial executions and the enforced disappearances to establish the truth. The world needs to know the exact number of those killed in 1988, their identities, the date, location, cause, and circumstances of each enforced disappearance and extrajudicial execution, and the location of their remains. Those suspected of responsibility must be prosecuted. The survivors and families of victims must be provided with reparation in accordance with international standards. The Western democracies, and especially the UK, should demand an international inquiry into the massacre and international accountability process in this year's UN resolution on Iran. I share the call on member states of the UN Human Rights Council, again, especially the UK, to mandate a UN inquiry into the widespread and systematic patterns of mass arrests, enforced disappearances, torture, and unfair trials of detainees, as well as the unlawful killings of protesters and bystanders that took place during and in the aftermath of last November's protests. With a view to ensuring accountability and guarantees of non-repetition, Iran must account for these crimes. The victims and their families must have justice.
There comes a time when no one can remain silent. There comes a time when no one should remain silent. And there comes a time when the voices that have been stilled must be resurrected through the voices of the living. There comes a time when the world must listen. There comes a time when the world must act. This time, since the 1988 massacre of political prisoners in Iran has been every time. What happened in 1988 was a crime against humanity. This crime was leveled against political prisoners by the Iran regime, a regime that seeks to preserve its own power, whatever the cost to Iran, whatever the cost of Iranian lives, and whatever the cost to legitimate claims for freedom and democracy. A crime against humanity that 30,000 human beings lost their lives, the names of those officials playing a direct role in effecting this fatwa and the murders are known. They are on the record too. As a barrister and human rights lawyer, as a member of the world community, and as a human being, I endorse the call for an official inquiry into the 1988 massacre. This official inquiry must begin without delay. It must be instituted immediately. The outcome of the inquiry must be acted upon. Those responsible must be called upon to answer for their crime. It is only by this action that the community, the international community, will begin to atone for its ignorance. Only then will the international community begin to redress the failure to act in the interests of the lives of all Iranians. Only then will the international community take seriously its responsibility to ensure the right of every Iranian to be free and to live in a democracy. I stand with the Iranians who stand for the right of all Iranians to live in a country where democracy and freedom speak, where democracy and freedom matter. I stand with all who call for an immediate inquiry into the massacre of 1988 of the 30,000 innocent Iranians. Thank you.